And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Angela Ford, who was hired in 1986 by the Defense Intelligence Agency to participate in Stargate's Psychic Phenomenon program, where she worked as a remote viewer using psi phenomena. And she's helped advance our understanding of human perception. Angela, thanks for joining me today and welcome.
Thank you for having me, Jeff. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, did your psychic abilities start once you were trained in the program or earlier, like even since birth?
No, I had the abilities ever since I was a young child. I can remember being very young and going out of body. I can remember having dreams, premonition dreams I would tell my mother about. So I remember being very young and these things happening to me.
Is it possible that you had a near-death experience as a child or an infant? Because I feel like those experiences sometimes turn on the abilities for people.
No, I did not have an NDE, but I had a lot of out-of-bodies when I was very young. I had a lot of out-of-body experiences.
Was that something that was spontaneous, or you had the ability to just get out?
It was spontaneous. I never had control over out-of-bodies, and I don't to this day. If they happen, they happen. But I can't control out-of-bodies. If I go out of body, I go out of body. I try to make the most of it because I like being out of body. But it's spontaneous.
Sometimes people use the words out of body, and sometimes people say astral traveling. And
it's the same thing.
It is the same thing because, yeah, I get different opinions. Some people say, no, they're two different things, but you're saying they're the same.
I'm sure that out of body is that you're out of body. The astral travel would mean that, you're flying, or, you're looking down at your body and you're flying, and maybe you're going somewhere.
It's
the same thing.
Did you ever turn around and see your body lying there on the bed?
Oh, sure.
Did it frighten you as a child?
No, everything seemed natural. Everything that happened to me psychically, things that when I began the automatic writing when I was 30, when I went out of body, everything was just natural, had a natural feeling to it.
Did you tell your family about it?
Oh, sure. I talked to my mother about these things, and she was very interested. My mother was very, very interested in what I had to say, and my mother was very interested in the paranormal. I can remember as a child, she would buy she had Edgar Cayce paraphernalia, Edgar Cayce books around the house. She would listen to Jeannie Dixon, and actually she bought an encyclopedia of parapsychology, and we still have it. She bought this whole. My mother always had the interest, and my mother, she believed in reincarnation, and she just always had this interest. So I really wasn't interested as a teenager or as a young adult. I thought my mother was, I thought the lady was, I thought she's crazy, and she liked to listen to, she believed in reincarnation, and she liked to listen to country western music, and I wanted to disown her. I would be so embarrassed. But when I really did get into the Army intelligence and I was going into the psychic program, I was interviewed by General Stubblebine, and he said, how did you grow up? Were your parents strict with you? And I said, no. But my mother had all of, she had this stuff that actually I just was ignoring it. And he said that I grew up with it. So in other words, once I realized that I was psychic or had the abilities, I just went with it because I wasn't told at a young, even when I would tell my mother my dreams, I wasn't told don't do that. I was allowed. Whatever my mother was bringing in, it allowed me to flourish once I identified myself as a psychic or said I can do this. Because some people are told whenever, I think Joe told me, whenever he saw one of his dead relatives, he told his parents about it, and, they were like, don't ever say that again. I mean, they shut it down. Mine wasn't shut down. I wasn't shut down.
Was your mom a psychic?
Yes, what we found out my mother was very psychic, and I can remember as a teenager, she would say certain things, like she knew when popes were going to die, and she knew about the 48 Israeli war. My mother knew things, but we just thought we didn't think she was um, psychic. We just thought she was just different. So the year that I graduated from college, I was unemployed, so I took a parapsychology class at a night university. At the local university, you can take these night classes that are like $35. Well, I had to quit the night class because I got a nighttime job, and I had to work because I was being hired this was in Pennsylvania. I was born and raised in Western Pennsylvania, and I had to quit the parapsychology class at night because because I received a nighttime job, and I had to make money because I was getting ready to come down to Washington, D.C. to work for the FBI, and I needed to save money to make the move. So I think I went to the class maybe a month, maybe 4 times, and it could have been an 8-week class or something. So what I when came down to Washington, after I worked for the FBI, I started working for Army intelligence. And and so one year, so I was down to Washington, I would say 9, 10, 11 years. But one August, my mother called me up, and she said that her and her friends wanted to take a class that fall, because my mother would always take classes, art classes. She was always looking for something to do. And she said, we don't know what to do. And I said, well, why don't you take that ESP class that Dr. Borders teaches at the university? And she said, I think I will. Well, when she signed up for the class, actually, we found out my mother she was very psychic. She could take people, she was good at, they called it psychometry, where you can take a person's object, like a ring or a watch, and you can tell them, you can give a reading based on an object. So actually she was very psychic. She was. And then when I became psychic, I started to attend there was a man by the name of Fred Mansbridge, and he worked at he had an institute in Alexandria, Virginia called the Mansbridge Institute, and I started taking classes there. Now, Fred also traveled to Western Pennsylvania to teach classes. So I told my mother and her friends, I said, you should go see Fred Mansbridge, take one of his classes, get a reading from him. So they said, okay, they would. Well, they did. And they came back, and apparently my mother did very well in his class too. So my friends would laugh because they said that Fred Mansbridge told my mother that she was highly evolved. So my friends called me up, they were laughing, and they said, we always thought, like she was kind of lofty, and there she ended up being highly evolved. So we always called her the highly evolved woman. So yes, my mother did have the abilities. And I found out later by working with the government that, yes, of course, it's a gene. So my sister had the ability. I have it. My mother had it. And I had 2 cousins and an aunt that had it.
Don't we all have it to some extent?
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. I mean, how do we know to be born? That's our intuition. We're psychic. We know to come out of that womb. When we go on. I mean, when we die, it's like we know when to leave. I think we do have it. We do have it. But I think, some people, maybe they're better engineers and some people aren't.
Do you think it's possible that just by reading books or watching videos like these, or being a host of a show like I am, that it will open your psychic abilities?
It does. And that's why when people come to me to learn remote viewing is only a technique. It's a technique. Put a picture in the paper, put a picture in an envelope, try to meditate, try to visualize. But if somebody's reading a book, if somebody is opening themselves, I always tell people, go, you go to a bookstore, go on Amazon, look and see what books are out there that teaches you about metaphysics, and buy the one that you're attracted to. You buy the one that you resonate with. That will open you up. Then you're ready to hear that information. I always encourage my students. I mean, just don't come to me, and remote viewing is only a technique. When you start getting into automatic writing, channeling, out of body, near death experience, it opens up to a whole other realm. It opens up into more spirituality. Different, your life changes. Your life changes.
Do you think there's any danger in channeling by, being contacted by a dark entity?
I don't know. Some people, I don't know. I mean, I think that there's a lot of fear. I think that channeling, I think that a lot of people are in fear. There's a lot of fear based. But I always say that entities, they like to be acknowledged. I know some people say, well, I have a ghost in my house and I'm so afraid. Just acknowledge the ghost. Just say hello. And they say, well, now it's like a poltergeist. Now the ghost is getting angry. You know, acknowledge the entity, acknowledge, and you'll be surprised. That's all they want is to be acknowledged. You can say, hello, how are you? And who are you? And tell me about yourself. So a lot of times I think that people are so fear-based that they bring in the emotion and everything. But I'm sure there are dark entities out there because Earth is negative and positive, and I felt negative energies. But I felt negativity, but it goes away. Just goes away after a while.
What do you think is some of the best ways to reduce your fear if you want to get involved in these kind of things?
I think you have to remain positive. Remain positive. Learn how it works. Learn metaphysics. Learn the metaphysical laws of the universe. Try to understand how the universe works.
Are there any certain books that you would recommend?
Oh, sure. I mean, sure. Who's the angel lady? Doreen, somebody. She did angel.
Doreen Lewis, maybe?
I don't know. I always tell people to buy the Silver Mind Control. It helps with meditation. It's a book that helps people meditate. And I think that meditation is probably, I think if one can meditate, it opens one up. And I do know there's a lot of meditation music on the internet. That's, healing frequencies. I believe that opens people up. The healing frequencies, the Silver Mind Control, techniques. There's you can buy books on channeling. They explain the different kind of guides. I think if you can just read and I don't know. I just think that something has to hit a person to have that spiritual connection. Once that happens, then everything will follow. The chakras will open, the different chakras will open, the hand chakras, the heart chakra, things will open, and then you begin your spiritual journey. But there has to be and who knows what's going to make, and who knows what's going to do it. I mean, I think there's a man by the name of Dr. David Clements, and he had one remote viewing experience, and it just kind of opened him right up. For me, I read a book. There was a book I read, and I resonated with it, and it was something, it was like, wow, I understand. So I think if people can find something that they resonate with and they understand, it can open them up.
Besides out-of-body experiences as a child, Did you have any other psychic visions or anything else that happened to you at that young age?
I had a lot of dreams I would tell my mother about, things that would happen.
Like,
I would tell her, I don't know. I can't remember. I don't know. I can remember sometimes some of the things would show up at the newspaper in the local newspaper a couple of weeks later. But I do remember, I just remember, I don't know, just I guess about businesses in the local area or Pittsburgh area, um, or, what was going to happen to people, things like that. It, but
and
sometimes.
in another interview you were in, you mentioned something about a future vision that would potentially come true when you were 80 years old.
Okay, I think that was the time that I had felt there was a war, and that at that time it was the Cold War, so we were always afraid of the former Soviet Union. And I can remember having dreams where there was a war going on, and the United States was allies with the former Soviet Union, and we were fighting against China. And that I can remember that, and I can remember telling my mother, and that confused me at such a young age because I knew that the former Soviet Union was our enemy. They were the number one enemy. Now, years later, when I was working at the FBI, I did meet a man. He was an Indian chief who had come into Maryland, I guess, for a meeting, and he had met my sister and I, and he had said, he said, tell me about your dreams whenever you were, 4, 5, or 6. And I can remember, that was the one I remembered. And he said, when you turn 80 years old, you will see that dream or those dreams come true. Now, what I've learned since then is the future can change. It's easy for a psychic to read the present and the past because the footprint is there. It's harder to predict the future because the future can change. So I don't know what's going to happen. I do know that I don't think China's in a position right now to have a war. I don't think they're economically sound. And right now we're not very pleased with Russia right now because of them invading Ukraine. So I don't know I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. But I do remember that.
What I like a lot about your story is that since you were in a remote viewing project with the government, to me, that means that this stuff is real and it's credible. They're not just throwing away money for nothing.
Some people may disagree with you. Some people may believe the government was throwing away money on us. It was a fight. It was a fight to stay alive. It was a fight to have the program.
I think you were working for the Army, and then somehow you transitioned into this program. How did that play out?
I came from Pennsylvania to work for the FBI. I really wanted to be an FBI agent, but I didn't have the eyesight. And I knew I couldn't be, and I was very interested in police work. My sister had a criminology degree, but the FBI had one of the lowest eye requirements to be an agent because they really don't wear uniforms, and that if they make an arrest, they know what they're walking into. So I figured if I didn't have the eyesight to work for to be an FBI agent, I wasn't going to get into any type of police organization. So I was working with a woman who left the FBI. She went to work with her husband. He was with Army Intelligence. They just came back from Japan. He was stationed in Japan, and he worked at Arlington. He worked for Army Intelligence, and she came to the FBI. And then eventually she left the FBI and went and worked with him because she could make more money because the FBI pay was terrible. It was very low. She contacted me several months later and said, Army Intelligence is offering internships for people with political science degrees. You should apply. So I applied. And I didn't hear anything. And she said, well, she said, you don't know languages and you don't have a master's. And she said, maybe you won't get the job. But then they did hire me. And I think they hired me because I already had the clearance, which meant they didn't have to put money out on trying to get me a clearance. So I went into this intern program under Department of Army Intelligence. And for 3 years, I was given classes and I was taught how how the intelligence community works, who the intelligence agencies were, their responsibilities. Like NSA did signals intelligence, and then you had the CIA. They were more with the human spies on the ground, and how you collect information, how you analyze it, how you disseminate it. So it was about 2 or 3 years. Now, after that, I was given a job. Now, my job was um, I became a country analyst. They called it a desk officer for Central American affairs. So I dealt with Central America, which was Panama, Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and then South America, and then terrorism. And then when the second Bush came along, he allowed the military to start. He gave the military permission to work drug interdiction. So I started doing that. So that was my job. I would give briefings every week and talk about current affairs that happened in my area of the world. Well, I didn't realize this at the time, but apparently the Department of Army had remote viewers, which I didn't know they had because it was a special access program. But so no matter who the general was that was the head of Army intelligence, they knew that they had these remote viewers, a handful of remote viewers at Fort Meade, Maryland. Now, General Stubblebine came along, and General Stubblebine, he he had a personal interest in remote viewing, in ESP, in anything. And he believed mind over matter. He was a spoon bender. So when he came over and took over Army intelligence, it wasn't only remote viewing he was interested in. He was interested in everything. And he had a man that worked for him, Colonel John Alexander. And Colonel John, he walked on fire. And so they were always scouting for people to see who had these abilities because that's what they were interested in. They wanted to know people who had these abilities. And I just found out about it I'm thinking, here I am working it for Army Intelligence like 9, 10, 11 years, and I just found out about this. So I had begun the automatic writing by the time I was 30. I was taking classes at the Mansbridge Institute. So I just approached him and I really wanted to be part of the program or just to meet him. And so we did. And then this was in 1980. This was in 1984. I met him. Now, he decided to retire that year because he was losing his support at the Pentagon level with the Joint Chief of Staff that was the head of intelligence. And he said, I'm just going to retire. And because he started his own company so he could do whatever he wanted to do. So uh he had decided to retire in 1984. So I figured, well, there went my chances because he was going to retire. Now, what I didn't know at the time and what I understood later was when General Stubblebine decided to retire, then the remote viewers at Fort Meade, they just figured that they were going to lose their jobs or they would close out the remote viewing part of the program. And so people were sitting around at Fort Meade not doing anything, getting ready for their next assignment. And a lot of the people that worked as remote viewers were military. So they just figured that, they would get orders and they would go somewhere else to work. Now, this was around 1984. Well, there was a man that worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency named Dr. Jack Verona. And Dr. Verona and the man that worked for him, Dale Graff, they were doing parapsychology research. They were funding places like Stanford Research Institute. They were funding the research of, like, how does the brain work? What are the Soviets doing? That we could get we could get scientific journals in Russia and find out what the Soviets were doing and have them translated. So they were looking at, Dr. Verona was funding parapsychology research at Princeton, Stanford Research Institute, Duke University, and someplace else. And then Dale Graff, he was looking at what are other countries doing in the world of remote of being psychic. So you had this whole other, you had the remote viewers at Fort Meade, who were doing operations, but you had this whole other thing going on as far as the research and what are other countries doing. So Dr. Verona, when he found out that the remote viewers may be going bye-bye or they may not be existing, he went to Congress and he said, don't close that, don't close Fort Meade down, keep it alive. He said, transfer the people from Army Intelligence to Defense Intelligence Agency and they'll work under me. So I think it probably took about a year to get all of that done. And they said that, and I believe Al Gore wrote the congressional language for it. So, and that must have taken about a year, because in January 1986, I had a visitor from Fort Meade and they came to visit me and they started to interview me for the program.
What other countries had programs that you're aware of?
The former Soviet Union, Brazil, Portugal, a lot of South American countries, Africa. Oh, yeah, Africa.
Were they doing remote viewing or something else?
Well, remote viewing is nothing more than ESP, and it's nothing more than ESP. Now, remote viewing was just the word that the scientists at SRI coined. But if I'm going to do a remote viewing session, I mean, how's it going to come to me? It could come through meditation. It could come through automatic writing. I could hear it. I could see it. It could be precognition. I mean, it's ESP. Remote viewing is nothing more than ESP. I know that the Soviet Union did this. We met the former psychics in 2015. I went to Moscow and met the former psychics because we became friends after the Cold War ended in 1991. And we said, well, what did you do? How did you, whenever you had to look at information or you had a session, what did you do? They were channeling. They didn't call it remote viewing. They were calling it channeling.
Now, when you say channeling, do you mean like using your higher self to gather information or another?
Some people call it the higher self. Some people call it working with entities. I work with entities.
Do you know what they were working with?
Well, no, they were giving me information that I needed.
No, I'm saying the Russians. Were they working with entities or their higher selves?
Oh no, they called it opening the channel for entity. They said, no, we teach people how to open up the channel. And I believe they were working with entities.
All right. So you get the job and then they started training you immediately, right? How was their training? Like, what were they doing with you?
Well, they knew I was a channelist, but they told me it was a bad habit, so I wasn't allowed to do it. When I went in, they said that I had a bad habit, and that first of all, you go into training. They're not going to put you into an operational. They're not going to put you in an operational. They're not going to give you an operational. You have to be trained. So I went in and they told me that I had a bad habit with my channeling, but they were going to teach me the right way to be psychic. So I said, okay, because I worked for the military before and I know what it's like. So you follow the rules, because sometimes I didn't and I would get into so much trouble and I wanted to be there. So I said, okay, okay. So they started me with, they called it extended remote viewing. And it's nothing more than, while I was waiting for my clearances to be passed from the Defense Intelligence, from Army to to Defense Intelligence Agency, I bought a book called The Silver Mind Control, because I thought, let me see what this is about. Maybe I'll learn something or know something before I go to the job. And I liked it. I liked it. You kind of, you close your eyes, you meditate, you see a picture, you come out and you draw a picture and you write what you see, what you saw. Now, the Silver Mind Control, they teach you sort of like turn on the TV. So I'm going down and now I want to watch TV. So I turn on TV and then I see the picture and then I come out and I write a report and I draw it. So they put me in extended remote viewing because the military were using coordinate remote viewing, which I guess was a methodology, or it was a methodology that Ingo Swann, he was a psychic that worked at Stanford Research Institute, and he put together something called coordinate remote viewing because because every time every time high officials would go to Congress to try to get money for the program, they would be laughed at by calling us psychics. So the Defense Intelligence Agency hired SRI to write something up that sounded technical and scientific. So whenever they would go to Congress to ask for money, they wouldn't be laughed at. So they had something called coordinate remote viewing. So the military in our office, and I don't know if you know anything about the military, but they love to train. They love to train. So they felt like they had this manual. Now it's down in writing on how to do this on these stages. So they began this big training and they called it CRV, coordinate remote viewing. Well, when I went in, they really couldn't put me in coordinate remote viewing because everybody, all the military, was in coordinate remote viewing. So and they just hired a new trainer. There was a new trainer that they brought in. If you couldn't remote view, you became a trainer. So there was a man that he needed a job because he was in Germany working. And if you work as a civilian overseas, you can only work there for 5 years. So he called up the boss of the unit, who was his friend, and he said, "I have to leave Germany. I need a job." And the man said, "Well, come on, you can come work for me." So he became a trainer because he wasn't psychic. And I think that they had to give him to me because he wasn't training anybody. So they put me with him. So I did extended remote viewing. And I think Lynn Buchanan did extended remote viewing, but he was getting ready to do CRV. So I didn't say, but so I did extended remote viewing. So then that's what I did. Now, um, as long as I did my job. They did coordinate remote viewing. I did extended remote viewing. They were military. I was female civilian. Everything was at peace. Everything was at peace. Everything was the way it was supposed to be. Now, about a year and a half, I'm into the program, and a lot of people started to leave that were in management. They retired. A lot of people at the program retired. The man who told me I had a bad habit, he retired. Um, the head of the unit, my trainer retired. I think he went back. He went back to Germany, I think. And then the manager, he retired. So they were bringing in more people. Plus, I think the scientists at Stanford Research Institute, they weren't there anymore either. There was a man by the name of Dr. Ed May that worked there. So all of a sudden, we have new people, new people, and they come in, and their attitude was, their attitude was, we don't care what methodology you use. It's, how you perform, that's an individual thing, and that is up to you. We just want results. So I said, well, I do automatic writing. Can I do it? If you think you can get results, you can do it. And we had one guy who wanted to dowse, or he did a pendulum, and they said, do the pendulum. So now we could do whatever we wanted to do. So I called my one boss, Fern, and I said, well, you know what, if you really want to, if you're interested, if you want to see what I do, come on over, we'll work together. So he put a target in he put a picture in an envelope or something. So he said, well, tell me about, more or less, tell me about the target in the envelope. And I didn't realize it, but the first target I had for automatic writing was Terry Anderson, the hostage in Lebanon. And so I said that, I don't know what I said, but I said, he was in a country that really wasn't his home country. I felt that he was under a lot of stress. And I said that he would eventually come out and be well. But it was just a short session, not much, but it was enough to prove that the automatic writing worked. It was enough to prove that it worked. And so my boss, so we continued to work, and we were working hostages, and my boss was bringing the information to headquarters up in Washington, D.C., and giving it to analysts because it was new information. Now, I think one of the information I said that Terry Anderson was in the Bekaa Valley, and the analyst said, "Oh, he would never be in the Bekaa Valley. That's not the MO of the terrorists." And he was. They did receive reports later from the Israeli Defense Force that Anderson was in the Bekaa Valley, because the analysts were taking my work in Washington and giving them to the Israeli embassy at night, and then the Israeli embassy would take my information and look and they did, and they came back and said that Anderson was in the Bekaa Valley.
That's great.
And then we had then we got called in one weekend because there was a Colonel Higgins that was kidnapped. He was a Marine. I think he was a Marine, Colonel Higgins. And see, that concerned in the military, and he got kidnapped. So they called us in, and they wanted to know where he was, and so they gave us pictures. So I said, I pointed to a location, and I said he was there. And of course, the people that I worked with said, "There's nothing there. All it is woods. How can he be there? How can he be there?" So the analyst didn't say anything, and at the end, the analyst said, "That's an old picture." Now, what happened with Lebanon, what happened with the hostages in Lebanon, if you remember Terry Anderson and Terry Waite, you couldn't get intelligence, you couldn't get signals down there, and you couldn't get imagery. The country is very mountainous, so the only way you had to tell what was going on is you needed spies on the ground. Well, that President Clinton took the spies out of Lebanon because it was getting very, very dangerous. So there was no method of collecting intelligence on the hostages back in 1988 and 89. So the only thing they had was psychics. That's when it came to us. Okay, what happened was the hostages, it was hard to get intelligence into Lebanon to find out what was going on. When I started to work with Terry Anderson and other hostages, then the analysts, they came and they said, "We want more information because it was only our unit that could supply the information." So Higgins got caught, and I said where he was, and of course they didn't believe it because it looked like woods. So the hostages, or the terrorists, every once in a while, they'll release a hostage. So they released they released, this must have been back in 1988. They released a hostage. He was German. His last name was Cordes. So they released him. Cordes went back to Germany, and our analysts flew to Rhine-Main in Germany to interview him. And they asked him, they said, "Where is Higgins?" And he said Higgins was right there. He pointed to the same picture where I pointed. Because he's right there. And they said, "Well, how can he be there? There's nothing there." And he said, "There is something there. They built a shed, or they built a structure to keep Higgins there. And he's there." And he was right where I said he was.
I must have felt great to get that confirmation.
Yeah. But they did, well, you know, they always go, "No, no, no. Can't be, can't be." But you get used to that, I guess. So then we started to work hostages. And then they were worrying about, I said there was a man, Poe Hill. I said he would come out with a sore throat, and he actually came out with throat cancer. He was diagnosed with throat cancer. And then there was a man by the name of Terry Waite. He was the English man. He was a preacher. He was a Terry Waite. I don't know if you remember him.
I don't.
He was a preacher. And he was very well known, and people were worried about him. But I think it was coming right towards the end. It must have been around the end of 1989. And you know, we kept going for locations, and then something just changed. And I don't know what it was, but something changed. And I remembered writing, I said that there was a man by the name of Livingston. His name was Jonathan Livingston. And I said, this man will help in the release of the hostages in Lebanon. Well, our analysts started to go through microfiche because they didn't have computers, and they didn't know who Jonathan Livingston was. They didn't know if he was with the State Department. Was he a military? Was he an attaché? They were trying to figure out who Jonathan Livingston was. Well, one of the analysts were at the Pentagon one day, and they saw my report sitting on the desk. Colonel Higgins had a wife. Her name was Robin, and she was in the military also. She was an officer. And he saw my report sitting on her desk, and he asked her, he said, "Who is Jonathan Livingston?" And she said, he's a British envoy that was just sent to Lebanon, and he's supposed to help in the negotiations to release the hostages. And the reason that our people couldn't find any information on Jonathan Livingston was because he was English. He was not American. So Terry Waite, when he came out and he wrote his book, he credited Jonathan Livingston as the man who broke the ice and got them out of Lebanon.
Did any of your work ever involve Gaddafi?
Yeah, yeah.
What did you do with him?
They were wondering, he was supposed to have a chemical plant. They could never figure out if he was bringing, there was a plant, and they really couldn't figure out what if it was a chemical plant or not. They couldn't get they just, you know, they're like, is he bringing chemicals in? Is it a chemical plant? So they asked me to do that. And I said that they were bringing the chemicals in on a boat. And the name of the boat, I called it Potato, and then you spell it like potato. And so we wrote up a report, and they said we said something like we suspect that he's bringing the chemicals in on a boat, and we spelled the boat Potato, like potato. So we sent it to the analyst, and I guess Dr. Verona was walking past the analyst's desk, and he saw my report, and he asked the analyst, he says, do you know anything about this? And the analyst said, it's not potato, it's batata. It's a B, potato. He said the Libyan has this vessel in their inventory. So Dr. Verona said, so he took the report, and he went to the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he said, you know, we think, you know, this person, I guess that they called me the collector because I was the spy. he said, okay, Dr. Verona said, okay, one of our people at Fort Meade, so then they know it's one of the psychics, said that they could be bringing in the chemicals through this boat. And I even said how they were coming in, like through Greece and Turkey, and how they were coming into Libya. So the director said, okay, and I don't know what Dr. Verona said, and and he said something like, it's the same person that said this, and that also gave us this information and that information. So they knew that I had a track record. So they said, okay, we'll look into it. So they called up Greece, and they launched a U.S. submarine to go follow this boat to find out if it was carrying the chemicals, if it was, and the information came back that it was highly possible, is how it came out. We didn't get the chemicals. We didn't get the chemicals, but I think they could confirm the vote did the rendezvous like I said it was, and it picked something up where I said it was, but I don't know if it said that how it came back. It was like highly probable. What I said was highly probable.
What was
it really wasn't considered a great hit, but
right?
It was worth it.
What was a typical day like for you at Fort Meade?
Well, you would go to work and you would sit at your desk, and we had one building where the remote viewers would sit. We didn't have computers at the time. And then we had a second building that we would walk over, and that's where we would do our work at remote viewing.
Would you remote view every single day?
Mm-mm. No.
What would you do on days that you weren't viewing?
I don't know, administrative type things.
Just paperwork.
I mean, we were, just anything. I mean, we were put out of the way. We were in a very remote location because you really you can't work remote viewers 8 hours a day, every day.
Would it be exhausting?
It was very exhausting, very exhausting.
When you would go in for a remote viewing session, how long would that last for?
Probably 40 minutes, and then you would come out and write your report. I mean, really, psychic information, if you can't get it if you're not going to get it after 20 minutes, you're not going to get the information. When you start gathering information, about 30, 40 minutes is when you're going to receive the information. It's like giving a reading. Everybody always wants to pay me for an hour reading. What they don't realize is that energy will come in, information will come in. But after 40 or 50 minutes, the energy starts dissipating. So I can give people 50 minutes worth of information, but they want the hour. In the last 10 minutes, I'm just repeating information. So you can't, I mean, you can't remote view for 2 hours straight. You can't do it. You can remote view for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes, come out, write the report.
And when you're
you can get burnout, and you can get burnout. And plus, we were under human use, so they couldn't. I mean, when Congress put this allowed the U.S. government and to have remote viewers. I mean, they were very strict because they were the ones that closed down the CIA, because the CIA were doing things in earlier years. They were giving people LSD to find out if when the CIA had their projects in earlier years, they were giving people LSD to find out if they would become psychic or if it helped them become psychic. Well, they were manipulating the mind, and I think 2 people or 1 person committed suicide, like jumped out of a building. So the CIA Congress came in and closed down the program with CIA. Well, then the Defense Intelligence Agency, Dr. Verona, went to Congress and said, we want a project. And the CIA said, we'll give you a project, but you're only going to remote view. And they said, you're not going to be doing bending spoons. You're not doing any type of, you're not going to manipulate their brain. I mean, you're not going to manipulate them. That was not allowed. And the generals at the General Counsel at the Department of Defense at the Pentagon wrote laws, even that that scientists cannot do certain things to us, management can't do certain things to us. We were very well protected because they did not want anything they did not want any type of influence over us. It was not allowed.
When did your program finally shut down, and why?
1995.
And why?
We lost support. Dr. Verona had retired. We had a general who was, I think, a 3-star general that was the head of the Air Force Medical Intelligence Command. He had put a lot of money into the program. We lost our, Dale Graff, we lost our support. We lost our support for people that wanted the program. Other people, bureaucrats, they don't want this program. We lost support. We lost our support. There people that wanted this program, truly, they were pioneers in the field. They were sincere about it. They were curious about it. They protected us. We lost that. We just lost that. Now what happened? They left, and then we became. Now I think we became part of other of management that just didn't want to be bothered with a bunch of psychics. What happens if they're wrong? Wonder if they do an operation and it's wrong. They don't want to be embarrassed. We lost our support.
Were most of the psychics military personnel?
Yes, because they came from the Department of Army. Because the Department of Army was the ones who had yes, most of them were. Most of them were. We had a few civilian people. But yeah, and we had one person that was a civilian, but she came in as she quit the Army, but she was still an Army reservist. So yes, they had the military background.
Do you know Major Ed Dames?
Yeah.
I had him as a guest before. Was he with your group or the predecessor?
No, he was with my group. He was with my group.
Oh, that's amazing. Was he one of the trainers with your group, or?
Yeah, he was a trainer. He trained CRV. He was the one who trained the military in CRV.
Oh, that's great. So after you left the program, what did you do next?
Well, I was still in the system. By that time, I was still within the intelligence. I was still an employee of the Defense Intelligence Agency. So they just put me in another job. I was always an analyst. I had a political science background, political science degree. So that was good for analysis work. So I did, I became they put me back into defense industries, and I became an analyst for defense industry. I worked on China strategic materials. I wrote a paper that Congress did a study on. I went back into the system as an analyst, and I worked China affairs.
Have you ever remote viewed anything off planet?
Whenever you say yes, but do you mean for myself or for military purposes or for Stargate purposes?
Either. I mean, like, did you happen to remote view the moon or?
You can, yeah, but I never did it I did not do it for Stargate because I was working on Operation Targets. Plus, though we weren't working with agencies that could give us feedback on the moon or Mars or Jupiter. So I never bothered really. And whenever we were training people, we had to give them, when you train somebody, they need feedback to see how well they did. So I know that Ed Dames would give people he would train people, and the targets would be Mars, and it had to stop because at that time we don't have any. How can you can't give somebody feedback on something that you don't know anything about. It defeats the purpose. But he
Right.
was a big Mars. That was personal for Ed. That whole Mars thing that was all personal for him. There was nothing that he could do with that information. We weren't working for the space agency. He could gather all the information he wanted, but he couldn't take it anywhere to find out what was true or what wasn't.
Right.
But it was his personal information, so he would have the remote viewer's view, and then he'd keep his little notes. And whether they were right, whether they were wrong, who knows? It was never confirmed or denied.
What about the moon? Because you would think that at least it could be potentially verifiable since it's so
Yeah.
close.
I mean, maybe so, but I mean, you have to remember we were Defense Intelligence Agency. We were like the sister to CIA. We didn't care what was going on at the moon. We our thing, we were looking at drugs, we were looking at hostages, we were looking at the Soviets, what are the Soviets doing in that building? This was intelligence gathering. In the intelligence world, the war still goes on. So that, the moon really wasn't our thing.
Right. Well, now you work with the Monroe Institute. How did you get hooked up with them?
Joe McMoneagle.
Did you know him from Stargate?
No, he retired in 1984. I went into the program in 1986, but I met Joe. I mean, by the time I had come out in 1995, I had met Joe. I had met Joe, had been in this company a long time. I mean, we became friends.
Did you ever meet Ingo Swann?
I never met him. I never met Ingo. Um, again, I came in 1986. By that time, Ingo was up in New York. He was not with SRI, Stanford Research anymore. I did not do Ingo's method. I never met Ingo. Joe McMoneagle wouldn't do Ingo's method. Joe McMoneagle would not do CRV.
What was his method?
Extended remote viewing.
Oh.
Joe did extended remote viewing. Coordinate remote viewing had too many stages, and it just Joe didn't, and I didn't have and when I went in, they just gave me extended remote viewing, but Joe he didn't do coordinate remote viewing. I can remember my boss, Fern Garvin, he was there in the early years as a remote viewer, and then they brought him back as the boss. And Fern said, he would he would never do coordinate remote viewing. It had too many stages. It was too controlled. It was controlled. There wasn't anything natural about it.
Are you still remote viewing today?
Sometimes.
What
Yeah,
do
I
you
do readings.
What do you usually do it for? Just for personal curiosity?
No. I work with Ed May. He has his projects. Sometimes he gets funded by organizations to look at certain things like precognition, consciousness. So I work for Dr. May, and I teach classes, and sometimes I give readings.
Did you ever meet Yuri Geller?
No, but I have a story about him.
Okay.
In 2015, Annie Jacobson wrote a book. It was called Phenomenon, and in it she talks about how the government used psychics, not just Stargate, but how they used them for years. I mean, she went into like how they were used before Stargate, and so Yuri Geller he worked at Stanford Research Institute for a while in the 1970s, early 1970s. So Annie interviewed him for her book. So Annie came to my house and she interviewed me. Okay. And then one night I was sitting at the computer. Oh, and she told me she went to England and she interviewed Yuri Geller. So one night I was sitting at my computer and I received an email from Annie. And she said, Angela, I was going through some of your remote viewing sessions. I want to write about it in the book. She said, I think you did extremely well on the the St. Louis Ark. So she sent me, and I said, "Oh yeah, I remember doing that." So I think she emailed me some questions, and I answered them, and we talked about this site, the St. Louis Ark, and I said that it's an easy remote viewing session, and if I teach, it's one of the first it's one of the first sites that I use because you can't miss the arch, and people draw the arch. So so she said, well, I'm going to use this for my book. So I said, that's fine. So she said, and oh, by the way, can you get me the information? She said she wanted whatever she wanted to write about what I did in this session way back. She wanted it finished that night. And I said, why do you want it so fast? And she says, well, tomorrow I'm going to Israel. I'm going to interview Yuri Geller. And I said, well, I thought that you interviewed him already. She said, I did, but that was in England. And now he's invited me to his home in Israel. And she says, and I've never been to Israel. And Annie, I believe, is Jewish. So she was all excited. So then she went to Israel and she met with Yuri Geller. And Yuri kept asking, I guess he must have asked her, like, who did, who were you writing about, or what are you going to say? And he said, and is anybody good, and have you found any good remote viewers? And she said, yeah, she found two, me and Joe. So, or Joe and me. And so they went to a tea shop, and Annie said something. She said, I think I'm going to buy some postcards for my family while I'm here. And so the tea shop owner came over to Annie and he said, my postcards are on top of this shelf. So I guess it was a tall shelf. So Yuri said, I'll go get the postcards for you. So he reached up to reach and when he brought them down, the first postcard was of the St. Louis Ark.
That's cool.
Yeah, and so I think from what I understand, Annie kind of freaked out because that's what we talked about, and that's what I think they were talking about at some point. But I think Annie, I mean, when she came back, she just couldn't believe it. She said, Angela, I can't believe that that's what we were talking about. And what with that postcard? And you could tell it was like a 1950s postcard. It was real old. But anyway, he did put on the card to Angela something. I have the card, and it's, and he's a drawer. So he drew all, do you know he sketches, he draws?
No, I don't know a lot about him.
Yeah, he draws, but you can see his drawings. But yeah, so it was like, best luck always, hugs and kisses, Yuri. So yeah, that's my Yuri Geller story.
Do you believe in coincidences?
I could tell you a story that I could tell you a story that you would never believe. But yeah, I do believe in coincidences. Too much has happened in my life. Too much has happened not to believe in them.
Have you ever had contact with UFOs or aliens?
Sure. Yes.
Can you share one with us?
My first UFO experience was I was 13 years old, and um, there was a bunch of we were 13 years old. There was a bunch of us kids, and it was springtime, and we just got done playing softball. And it was that time we had to quit playing because it was getting dark. So it was that time of day whenever it's light and then it gets dark. So we were walking home from the ballpark and we heard this whoosh, 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 whoosh. And we looked up and we saw a UFO. It just flew right over our heads. And so we screamed and we yelled and we went, oh, ooh, ooh. So that was my first sighting. And then my second sighting was right after I retired in 2010. I saw two UFOs. And then I believe I saw or was in mental conversation with, I think it was one of the Greys.
Really? How did that play out?
I don't know. It was like I was just there, and it was like I went through a vortex or something, and I saw this Gray, but I felt like I was with him before. It was like when I saw him, I said, "Hey, how you doing? Long time no see." So I think we were probably with them before, but I was kind of happy to see him. It was like an old friend. I was like, "Hey, buddy, how you doing?" But he looked at me, I looked at him, and I think he probed me. He had something in his hand and he could have probed me. And then I took it out, and then whatever he had in his hand, I took it out of his hand, and then I probed him. And then he vanished.
Well, since you've worked in the government, do you think we're ever going to get full disclosure?
I think that the fact we can't hide you can't hide it anymore. We have technology. We have people that you see a UFO, you take your cell phone, you take a picture. I don't think we're going to hide it anymore. I don't think it can be done. And the fact that they took it to the congressional level, it see, I think what happened before is when the UFO, I there was a woman I knew whose father was in the military, and every summer when she was out of school, she would go work at the Pentagon. She needed a job, and she worked in the basement where all the UFO studies were going on, where all the UFO stuff. And I said, why was the UFO stuff kept so classified? And she said, the people that worked on the UFO stuff just didn't want the world to know because they felt it would panic the world. And I said, but you would think if, you had uh, new new regimes coming in, like um, different presidents, and they have their own defense secretaries. And I said, why wouldn't the upper echelons of the Pentagon, why didn't they receive the information about UFOs? And she said, Angela, it was so secretive that if somebody came along and said, well, do you think you should brief the defense secretary on this project? And people would say, oh, no, he doesn't hold the clearances. They kept it very close. They kept it very tightly closed because they actually believed that people would be in fear. But it's changed. It's changed. It's out of the bag now. The cat's out of the bag right now.
Have you heard the term catastrophic disclosure?
Yeah. And what does that mean to you?
To me, it means that the ETs will just disclose themselves regardless of what any government says.
That's what I always thought would happen. Is they're gonna come anyway, whether we believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And they helped us before, and maybe we need help again. Maybe they'll come to help us. But now people say, "Oh no, they'll just come to people who believe in them." So I don't know what to believe, but I would love there to be catastrophic disclosure. I
Yeah.
would love it.
I think we're ready. We've seen enough sci-fi movies about it. Really, how
Yeah.
can you be any more ready?
Yeah, you can't hide it anymore. Just because people can. I lived in an apartment that my girlfriend lived there. She helped me get the apartment, and that was the apartment where Adamski, he was a Egyptian researcher on UFOs, and he showed in there was a woman that worked for him named Madeline, and my girlfriend used to live in that apartment, and the first UFO film was shown in that apartment.
To who?
Well, I guess that they made a movie of it, and that um, my girlfriend was living in the apartment. That she was older than I was. This must have been in the 1950s or 60s, and that he just had some people there, and they showed the film, and then he went on to. I guess it was shown in other places. Remember whenever you would go to a movie theater and they would show something before the main feature?
Right.
But he made a film, and it was shown in my apartment. But I'll tell you, everybody that came into that apartment somehow had UFO experiences.
Wow.
That apartment just had an energy about itself. It was the number was 203, which added up to a 5. And if you know anything about numerology, 5 is adventure. It's like adventure. It's different. It's different.
I've interviewed over 800 near-death experiencers And a significant number of these people start having UFO or ET contact afterwards. And I believe that somehow that also opens you up to
Oh, sure.
contact.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Anything. Oh, sure. Once, if they had an NDE, their life is going to change.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have a friend. Her name was Jeanette Lucas. Her last name was Matasha before she got married. And her father was a very well-known dowser. He had 5 children. She was the last one. She was a twin, but she had these abilities. She's a dowser. She can find, she works criminal cases. She finds dead bodies, and then she has a team that goes out and gets them. But she solved many cases, but she's a good dowser. Now, every time she gets sick, she has a near-death experience. And I think she's had 4 or 5 near-death experiences. And I think it's just the way her body works. They say that if you know somebody that gets hit with lightning
Mm-hmm.
strikes somebody, they said most likely that person will get struck with lightning many times in their lives. It's their body. It's just the way they're made up. And I think that's the way she's made up. Every time she gets sick, she has out of bodies or she has near-death experiences. And, and she says, she kind of goes to God and, and he'll say it's not your time. So she comes back. But
Some of my favorite near-death experience stories are of
okay,
lightning strikes.
okay, tell me
One of my favorite ones was a man, I think he's an orthopedic surgeon. He happened to be on a payphone, and I think the lightning hit the tree and bounced from the tree to him, and it knocked him backwards. And he felt like he physically just kind of, he didn't fall over, but got pushed backwards. And he turned and he saw a woman coming, and she just walked right past him and completely ignored him. And he didn't understand why. And then he turned to watch her. And then when he turned and looked over his shoulder, she was giving his body CPR on the ground.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
He was watching it. Wow.
What I really love about that story was him exiting the body was instantaneous. There was, there's no transition time. When he just moved backwards, he just thought,
He went right out.
yeah. That's personally one of my type of favorite stories is when they just pop out just like
Yeah.
that. It's got to be life-changing when that happens.
Oh, I'm sure. Out of body. See, they say when people see UFOs, it's change. It brings, you change, of course. It's, you start questioning life. I mean, there's more to just the physical body. And you start thinking, I think, or wonder or question.
Yeah. Well, what else are you working on, if anything, that you want the people here watching to know about?
I wrote a psychic thriller novel
Cool.
with someone from Ukraine, Victor, he was with the Russian or Soviet Union Army, and I met him. He's in the United States. I met him through Dr. May. They work together. So I'm getting a novel. It's being edited now, and hopefully that will be published soon. I write children's stories, which will be animated, I hope, very soon. And I teach remote viewing, and I have an invention that I just got a provisional patent on.
Wow. What's
So I have
that?
a lot.
Well, you did mention something about psychic readings. Are you still doing that?
Yeah, I'm still doing psychic readings and teaching remote viewing classes.
Well, if people want to connect with you, do you have a website or something?
No, I have an email. I don't have a website because I'm so busy.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm working on getting a website. But I'm very, very busy with the readings in the classes. It's like I haven't. So that's why I never got a website, because I was already so busy.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm in the process of getting a website. I guess for the book or whatever, I will.
Do you want to share your email address, or are you too full of people?
No. I can share it. It's my name backwards. Ford, Ford, Angela, Angela, jeff04@gmail.com.
Angela, before we finish up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
I don't know, be kind to each other. Just be kind and be happy.
Well, Angela, thank you for being my guest. I really appreciate you, and I wish you massive success in whatever you're doing.
Thank you. And it was nice meeting you.
Likewise.
Okay. It was good luck to you too. Good
Thank
luck
you.
to the best to you. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.